we make the waiver offer, well, not everybody accepts the offer. Some people say, well, that's great. I understand you're offering me a waiver, but I want an appraisal. So I think it just shows you that the research they did and the numbers they came up with and the way we're setting the dials, it works. The math is right. I think there will always be a demand for appraisers. I don't see the models getting to the point where we totally replace the appraisers.
Episode 21 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, excited to be here with you again today. Looking forward to this conversation as we do a further deep dive into appraisal waivers.
Yeah, great to be here, Mark. It occurred to me that I think we recorded last time. We were in the same room and didn't even say anything about it. And it's probably the reason that our audio wasn't quite as good. Anyway, we're still learning as we go, but somebody recently congratulated us for 20 episodes. I think I had heard from someone that that's a bit of a milestone in this space. We wouldn't know any different. We're just kind of, merrily along our way, but definitely looking forward to this conversation that we have teed up here.
Episode 21, just the gambler and me thinks blackjack, so it's got to be lucky on some level here. Well, let's bring in our guest, Jeff. It is clear that you and I know almost nothing about appraisal waivers, or at least did know nothing as we came into this. We hear stories of it taking business away from us one way or another, but we wouldn't know. The business never got to us one way or another. So it's been really good to dive in deep. The real reason why we have our guest here is that we needed interest rates lower than 7%. And of course, Danny Wiley, Senior Director of Single Family Valuation from Freddie Mac, got that done for us today. Rates sitting at 6.93%. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, I'll take no credit for any, no credit or no blame for any interest rate movement. How about that?
Fair enough. Well, you have been an appraiser for what, 3 decades?
A little over 4 decades actually now. Yes,
Wow.
which just means I'm old. Yes, I worked in the field 29 years, independent fee appraiser. Started in a firm, had my own firm. Then I spent 8 years in AMC land, as I refer to it, and now I'm just finished my 5th year at Freddie Mac.
I think that background is really useful. I'm sure those that know you, and there are a lot that know you, is you do such a good job of traveling around appraiser conferences and getting to know folks and kind of spreading the good word of Freddie Mac. But knowing that background, I think, is really useful for everybody. That and is the lens that most that are making these decisions in single family valuation, I'm sure, come with is some pretty deep understanding of the appraisal process here. So it's really good to know. And this is the 3rd episode that we are kind of diving into appraisal waivers. The first was Jeff and I just kind of off the cuff reactions to the FHFA announcement of the expansion of the appraisal waiver process. I think the most extreme, going from 80% to 97%. There are some specifics there, but just comes at a really rough time for appraisers. This sort of screams to us less work, and we already don't have enough. So in the second episode, we talked to Ed Pinto from the American Enterprise Institute, who was I think a little more critical of the waiver process, and thought the next natural step would be to have someone come in from a government-sponsored enterprise here and talk a little bit about the case for waivers and their impact on the industry. So maybe you could start a little bit with just telling us some kind of macro level perspective on this waiver announcement.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And first of all, I would say I respect that a lot. He does a lot of good work. We've met with him many times over the years, both before I was at Freddie Mac and since I've come to Freddie Mac. I do think, I would say I didn't understand waivers either, really, until I came here. And, you indicated my title as Senior Director of Single Family Valuation. That's true, but the full title includes risk management. And anybody who's been to a conference has heard Scott Reuter say this. We're in the business of risk management, right? And that's what we do. And I certainly understand the reaction from the appraiser community, because if you don't know how waivers work, and most appraisers don't, I think it is easy to sort of, I don't want to use the word panic, but maybe overreact or something like that to that announcement, right? I think it's very important to understand that the LTV, and we're talking about the expansion to 90 for waivers and the expansion to 97 on inspection-based waivers. It's really important to understand that that's just one threshold, right? And there's lots of, that's just gets you in the door to your consideration. And to illustrate that, you can look at some of Ed's numbers. We don't publish these numbers, but Ed does. And you can look at the 80% LTVs now and see what percentage of them get waivers, and it's nowhere near 100%. It's not even the majority of them, right? So LTV is just the first screening step. Then there's a lot of other screening steps behind that. And I'll just get to the bottom line as quick as I can to help reduce the panic and the reaction to this. How much will waiver use increase under this expansion? It's going to be a relatively small effect. We'll probably see waiver use increase something on the order of 1 to 2%. Mm-hmm. It's not going to wipe out the appraisal business at all. It's, I would say most appraisers won't even feel the effect of this change.
Most of what goes into that decision then, Danny, if I'm understanding correctly, is really kind of credit strength of the borrower. So yes, you know, it can go up to 97% on the LTV side, but then what you're saying is a lot of other factors that get considered have to do with things that the appraiser's never going to see, but debt to income ratios, you know, credit strength and score, are those some of the factors that also then decide whether this is part of the, or fits the waiver qualification or not?
Well, that's another common misunderstanding, at least from the Freddie Mac perspective. We call our program ACE, which stands for Automated Collateral Evaluation. And that's what it is. It's an evaluation of the collateral. There is a pre-screening on the borrower side, but different nuances in that do not affect the waiver offer decision.
Okay.
It's really all about evaluating the collateral. That's why we call it ACE, Automated Collateral Evaluation. So when we consider anything new, be it expansion of waivers, be it hybrids, any alternative to the traditional appraisal, the first thing we do is test it and compare it to the traditional appraisal. So we run what we call test and learns. We set up a small test, usually with certain identified lenders in a controlled environment. And we say, well, what if we did this? And then we compare those results to the results of an appraisal, right? And we actually published a paper earlier this year. I sent you guys a link to that. Maybe you can post that out in the, where our chief economist office went back and did a multi-year study on the performance of the loans that were supported with waivers compared to, yeah, that's it, credit risk, the case for ACE. And we try to make it a fair fight. So in this paper, we compare the loan performance of those loans that had waivers, not to all loans, but to other loans with similar characteristics that were based on appraisals. And as the paper will show, when you look at the loans where we had the waiver offer, our default probability, our defaults are lower and our default costs are lower. So I think what that shows you is we've set the dials so that this is not us taking on more risk. In fact, the pure math of it shows we're taking on less risk with these loans.
Boy, I wasn't expecting it to go this direction, certainly so early, Danny, that I am so far away from clearly understanding the waiver process. And I think you're helping highlight the misunderstandings that I have. I assumed that stronger borrowers were getting waivers. And I think you are purely saying that if that happened, that is coincidence, that the waiver is a property analysis. Am I right there?
Well, I would say that's true, but there is a certain minimum threshold you have to have on the credit side to even be considered. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Right. But once you cross that threshold, once you are, we call it an LPA accept. Once you have an accept, then minor differences, a slightly higher credit score is not going to increase your probability of getting the waiver.
Interesting. Okay.
And,
Yeah,
and I'm speaking just for our model, right? Our program is based on automated collateral evaluation.
and to help you emphasize that, you are specifically saying that Fannie's is different and separate, maybe similar in some ways, but it is wholly separate from what Freddie does.
We do not share the same algorithms or parameters on the waiver process, so I would hesitate to make any comment on their waiver program.
Makes sense. So this report is fascinating, and I think appraisers, brokers, realtors alike should really spend 15 minutes kind of scanning through it. I think it's really enlightening. This was published in May of 2024. It looks like I had never seen it or heard of it, and in fact, Jeff, in our first episode covering waivers, I was certainly saying I'm assuming that there is some risk analysis the GSEs have done that is saying, hey, we can expand this, okay, and it's that risk analysis would say not only are we not increasing delinquencies, we're maybe improving them. It's just intuitive, I think. And this talks deeply about that. And I can only imagine that there was a breadcrumb of data release leading up to this that if somebody was watching closely, they could see the timelines.
Well, again, we're in the risk management business. We don't manage from feelings, we manage from data, right? And this is something that we're just continually monitoring, right? As you would expect, we have a team of appraisers here at Freddie Mac that report up through me. One of the things we do every month, I think this is some of the most fascinating testing we do. We make the waiver offer. Well, not everybody accepts the offer. Some people say, well, that's great. I understand you're offering me a waiver, but I want an appraisal. Well, for us, that's research gold, right? Because we made an offer of a waiver, but then we got a full appraisal report behind that. So we can take those appraisal reports, we can go through them, we can look at them and say, okay, how did we do on the value of that property? How did we do on condition of that property? So every month we take a sample of those people who were offered waivers but didn't accept them, and we compare, we look at our initial decisions, the value we had, the condition probability we had, and we compare that with what we find in the appraisal report that we get on the back end, right? So this is something we continually monitor that. We've looked at thousands and thousands of them since I've been here.
On the screen, Jeff, I have the summary statistics, and we won't get, boy, I think the surest thing to have no viewers is to go line by line on these, but suffice to say that the data in the first two left-hand columns that are sort of headed by the word ACE are the waivers granted and taken. A waiver was used. And then on the eligible non-ACE side, the right two columns, a waiver was offered but not taken.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting, and I think you have higher instance of loan delinquency adjusted for COVID forbearance on the eligible non-ACE, so the waiver offered but not taken. What a peculiar finding.
Yes, and that finding has been very consistent. I was very surprised when I saw that the first time about 5 years ago. But every time we've tracked it, the ACE loans have better performance. But I think that speaks to where we're setting the dials and how conservative we're being in managing the program, right?
So why would eligible non-ACE properties have higher delinquency rates? It's just such a strange conclusion that the numbers suggest, and it sounds like consistently. When we talk to Ed Pinto, there's pretty clear evidence, and even in the support in this report, it suggests that whatever AVMs or collateral evaluation tools you are using are 1 to 2% or some number lower than what appraisals are coming to. And in your report here, you reference sort of inflated appraisals, which is saying the sort of same thing. And so I wonder if maybe a weaker borrower that needs a higher number or thinks they need a higher value to get would reject the waiver. And so you have weaker borrowers rejecting the waiver and getting an appraisal. Have you guys looked at maybe why the delinquency would be higher?
We've looked at that from several angles. Don't have a definitive answer to share with you. Again, we set this by the math, right? The same people that published this paper many years ago did some research too, and got out the pencils and the calculators, right? And essentially, we know the magic number in our automated valuation machine. We know the combination. We know the forecast standard deviation that makes the AVM as reliable as an appraisal report, right? So we use that in our credit risk management here. So we use that to set the dials in our ACE program, right? So I think it just shows you that the research they did and the numbers they came up with and the way we're setting the dials, it works. The math is right. Now, I will say this too. I want to throw this out there. I've shared these kind of results with appraisers in the past, and appraisers frequently come back to me and say, well, that's not even fair. You shouldn't evaluate me as an appraiser by your loan delinquency rate. I would just say, well, the business we're in is purchasing mortgages. And if we're managing our risk is that mortgage goes delinquent for some reason. So this is how we manage our risk, or it's how we evaluate our risk, right?
It's an interesting perspective, Danny, and I think that, as appraisers are trained in valuation, theory and report writing and complying with standards, there's not this understanding, I think, that kind of comes to the forefront of someone like you who has been a practicing appraiser on the AMC side, now at at Freddie in a GSE role. And what the purpose, I mean, frankly, if you want to boil it down to USPAP language, what the intended use of the appraisal is sometimes different than I think what appraisers, maybe assume based on, on what we're doing. Mark, I was going to let you just keep going. Oh, go ahead.
So
Ken.
let me stop you right there. It goes back. Think back to the last USPAP class you had. I think they just changed it in this version. But for several years in the USPAP update, the first question was, why do clients order appraisals, right? And for us, we require the lenders to order appraisals as a risk management tool. That's the whole point of us requiring appraisals, is to manage our risk. And what we've shown with the numbers that you just had is that in certain cases, we've identified that we can manage that risk without the appraisal.
That makes sense, because like you said, there are a lot of different factors that go into managing that risk or that decision, on an individual loan basis. Mark, I was going to let you just keep going. I was going to point out that your intuition was pretty good. You almost missed the compliment by just continuing to talk. But when we first read and responded to this, there was this intuition, or kind of this sense that the only reason that it would make sense to expand the waivers over a broader range of LTVs is if there's data that suggests to you guys internally that we're not actually increasing our risk, but we have tools to mitigate it or manage it based on various inputs, from the borrower to the collateral asset. One of the data points that we had up there, Mark. In fact, maybe even before I jump to that, are there any points you wanted to make on this graph? I do have a question around volumes, like generally, but we can circle back to that in a second.
Yeah, I think just so we will post this report in the show notes for everybody to look at. Danny, thank you for forwarding this to us, and this was kind of important research for us leading up to this recording. So thank you for that. And I think this graph, ultimately the findings are roughly that there is a 13% less delinquency rate in the use of appraisal waivers versus when a waiver was offered but rejected and gone the traditional route. So a 13%. Now that 13% represents a 0.55% delinquency rate when a waiver is used, and 0.64% when the eligible non-ace or the rejected waiver is used. So these are very tiny percent.
Yes.
It's pretty good stuff all the way around, it seems like.
That's right. Yeah. And again, I think that goes back to the whole risk management program we have, right? I think I mean, I hear it oftentimes that, oh, we're just trying to eliminate the appraisers. Right? And I would say to that, well, if that's our goal, we're not doing a very good job of it, because historically right now, you look back over the last year or two, 85, 90% of the loans we purchase are backed by appraisals.
Wow.
Right? That continues to be the case. We continue to rely on that as our primary risk tool, which speaks to our view of it, right? If we thought, if we had different goals, the numbers wouldn't be nowhere near that, right?
Well, Jeff, I think to close this out, well, at least this report, as I'm looking at it, the timeline of events is that Fannie and Freddie started a waiver process roughly in 2017. They've then analyzed from 2017 to 2023, including COVID years, default rates in the increase or change in default rates or delinquency rates when a waiver was used. It concludes to them that it is 8 to 13% less delinquency when a waiver is used. So that says, hey, we're not hurting the process. It's a natural next step to allow us to use the waiver process on a wider range of loans, which the GSEs will use discretion. I think most would argue, oh, sure, you'll use discretion now, but maybe not later. And so that is the process. It is going to reduce the number of appraisals that were used otherwise. But I think with the availability of data and tools that are here to us, we should expect that responsible lending and collateral analysis would not need the same product that was used in the 80s 100% of the time. Like, it just makes sense to me that it would move that direction.
Well, and we focused on one aspect here. There's 3 bars you have to pass for a new process, and I talked about one of them where we compare to appraisals and we try to get the same level of risk management, right? The others are efficiency in the loan production process. Well, clearly, appraisal waiver contributes to that. We see 7 to 10 day faster closing times when there's no appraisal required, right? We also look at overall cost of producing a loan. Well, if you remove the cost of an appraisal, that's going to reduce the cost of producing the loan to the consumer, right? And then the last one is equitable treatment, and we've done extensive fair lending analysis of the waiver program. So you have to pass all 4 of those for us to make a change and to adopt a new product. Right?
So last comment, Jeff, on this report, I promise. So Dave, I think critical appraisers watching this would say, Mark, why? First, how on earth is an appraisal lead, or the use of one, leading to more delinquency versus not? Maybe you could speak to that in 2-part question. So then the second is, doesn't the rubber really meet the road in default loss when you come back to appraisal, right? That's where we really see the impact, I think. And we're just not really in a time of default loss, it seems to me, because of so much price appreciation and the lack of foreclosure. Is that how to think about it now?
I think that's true. But I will say that when we look at the numbers, we also see lower cost, right? And I'm not going to say it's the total reason, but I will say that one of the things we do observe in appraisal reports, an issue we see, is the underreporting of required repairs. I think when people think about AIR and appraiser independence, I think most of the focus is on getting a value. But I hear from a lot of appraisers, they feel the pressure to not make a report subject to repair or subject to an inspection when it should be. And I'm not saying that's the definitive reason, but in my view, we haven't run the numbers to get this definitively, but I think that's part of it's a contributor to the default cost. I will say every month we meet with our post-funding QC group and we review reports. The next meeting where we don't have one with the repair issue will be the first, right? Every month we look at appraisal reports with clear pictures of repair items. where the appraisal should have been made subject to a repair, subject to an inspection, and it was just done as is, right? And the big one for us is water. I shared with you guys in an earlier conversation, just last month, we're looking at an appraisal report, and it discloses that there was a history of past water problems in the home, but no water was observed during the inspection. You flip back to the subject properties, and right there in the basement picture is this big pool of standing water in the basement. Okay, for us, that's an automatic. That's got to be subject to something if there's water standing in the basement. It's one of our FAQs on condition that we have posted on our website. It's probably the most common item we see because getting water in that foundation, clearly that could be a potential long-term problem and a very expensive problem to fix.
Yeah, and addresses the risk concerns I think that you guys are worried about. If I've got a deteriorating asset, or if I've got a large ticket expense item that a borrower is going to have to either come out of reserves or borrow money to address, then the strength of their credit profile changes, and your risk of potentially getting the property back, changes.
Exactly.
And all of that can be addressed, by proper disclosure up front, assuming that it's there.
Right.
That makes sense for sure. Well, one of the things that we in that report, and I don't think we need to pull it back up, but it was just noteworthy to me in a high level. I think over that 2017 to 2023 period, if I remember right, it was just over 13 million total loans, I think, that had gone through Freddie Mac. 5.5 million, roughly speaking, qualified for the ACE, and then what we were talking about were kind of the subsets of, did they accept the ACE or did they use the appraisal? I'm curious, from your perspective, so, 5 million of the 13.5 million or whatever it was that qualified for ACE, and not even all of those, took it. Danny, what's your perspective on volumes in the moment? If the waivers aren't the result or the reasoning for, volumes being low in the moment that appraisers are observing, what are you guys seeing at a high level that you can speak to about volumes in general?
Yeah, well, I will point out to everybody that we publish the appraisal volume on our website. It's on our appraiser section on our website. Every month we have the graph of appraiser volume. If you look pre-COVID, for the decade before COVID, I think the median number was around 450,000 appraisal reports a month coming from the UCDP. Then COVID hits and the rates go to 2s and 3s, and appraisal volume went to 700,000 or 800,000 a month. With the rates where they are now, those numbers are hovering more around 300,000, right? And it's not because of any dramatic increase in waiver use or hybrids or any of that. None of those account for this drop. It's really about interest rates. It's about transactions in the market.
And if I heard you right, the average utilization of appraisal waivers as a percentage of the total loans that originated has held fairly constant recently. I mean, it's not a drag. It's not that 50 or 60% are now getting appraisal waivers or something.
No, I mean, I hear a lot of appraisers, and Mr. Pinto, our friend we discussed earlier, he likes to go back to that 40% number from COVID days. Remember, those are mostly rate term refis, right? That was a huge there was a huge waiver use on rate term refis, and rightfully so. I mean, if we already own the loan, we have that loan, we already have the risk, and we can do a rate term refi and lower that rate. That just reduces our risk. And even if we were upside down on that property, a lower interest rate is going to give us lower risk, right? So, yeah, but historically, it's nowhere. Once we got past the COVID period, and once we got past the 2% and 3% interest rates, and everybody in the world refinancing. I mean, I look back. I do a monthly report looking at our volume of loans and the mix of loans, and we've literally flipped totally. For a couple of years there, 70% or more of our business was refinance loans. And now we look at it, and that number is more like 15 to 20% is refinance loans. Right? So we've gone from a totally refi-driven market to a totally purchase-driven market.
Is there one of those scenarios, Danny, that's better suited for a waiver, a refi versus a purchase?
Oh yeah, the waiver is much better suited for refi, I think. Right? We get a higher, because in a refi situation, we're more likely to have good data on the house from a prior appraisal report, if nothing else, right? But having said that, again, I don't want to say that we shouldn't use it on purchase, because remember, where we're setting the dials, and again, go back to our report, we're setting the dials at a point where we have good risk management on those purchases, right?
You bet. Well, you've got the data of the home, the property being exposed to the market and contract price and listing price and histories. I mean, there's information to analyze there as well. But
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you look at the average home that's listed today, you've got a listing somewhere on the internet with where you got 20 pictures, 30 pictures, and a lot of listings now. A lot of listings are now having the 3D scans in them. You can literally go in and tour the home yourself, right? Again, we're trying to use all the tools and the technology and the data to make good risk decisions.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One of the things I wonder about is, there is this proliferation of data available that didn't used to be the case. I mean, you talked about how many decades you've been in the business, right? And when the data was an MLS book that was printed at a local, through a local organization or something, the appraiser was really the source and in some sense data keeper of their gatekeeper of the information. Now the data is much more ubiquitous, and you all, I mean, everybody has access to more technology and ability to crunch or run the numbers. It seems that with where you're building for the future with a new version of the uniform appraisal data set and those sorts of things, you anticipate the appraiser having a role well into the future. But there's also the opportunity to evaluate things in different ways. How critical is appraisal flow to supporting your models, and how do you think about the need for appraisals going into the future?
Oh, I don't think there's, I don't see appraisers going away, right? The models and the algorithms, ask any modeler and they'll tell you that all models are wrong, but some of them are very useful, right? There's just certain properties that are never going to be good fits for the model. Sometimes there's nothing unusual about the property, there's just not adequate data, right? I do think the future is that I think there will always be a demand for appraisers. I don't see the models getting to the point where we could totally replace the appraisers. And again, look at our actions. You mentioned the new UAD. We've spent over half a decade developing that. Well, we certainly wouldn't have done that if we thought appraisers were going away, right? Now, having said that, I think the appraisers, honestly, some of them need to step up their game a little bit, right? We need to see some market analysis that's really market analysis. We just had a recent announcement with Fannie Mae on that. And one of the reactions I get from that is, oh, you're just trying to push the values up. And I just sort of chuckle. It's like, no, my concern's actually the opposite. If you're not doing the market analysis now and you're not making positive market condition adjustments or time adjustments, as some people call them, in a good market, then you're not going to do the market analysis and make the negative adjustments when the market turns, right? So a lot of good tools out there for that. I encourage, if you're not already using one of those as an appraiser, I encourage you to look into that. We see, you can look at research the FHFA's done and published papers on. We have similar research. We just don't see time adjustments or market condition adjustments being applied at a rate that the market's suggesting would be suitable.
Danny, I want to double click on this "are appraisers going away" question, because every time I see you or Lyle from Fannie speak, this is the question that everybody has to address. I mean, just obligatory, it feels like, and we hear it so much that the questions and the answers are always sort of the same, and I've been in this space almost 2.5 decades now, and I remember, even in my early involvement with the Appraisal Institute early on, was, hey, you need to find a way out of mortgage generally because it's going away. I mean, this was 2004, 2005, and that fundamentally has not been the case over the last 2.5 decades. You in our pre-show, I think I roughly have this right, that pre-COVID, Freddie was doing about 400,000 appraisals or is that loans?
That's a UCDP number. That's a joint number, Fannie and Freddie. It was
Okay.
440,000 submissions a month, appraisals.
Beautiful. During COVID, we were 700,000.
7 to 8, yes.
Okay. And at times you were seeing about 40 to 50% waivers at the height, because we just basically doubled the amount of volume needed, or the amount of appraisals needed from the same set of appraisers that were out there.
That's right.
And then now we're at 300,000 a month, roughly, in this opposite ZERP thing that we're working on here too. And with waivers at roughly 10 or 15% or something like that. And so, you know, the decline we're seeing, I've talked to appraisers in my own market here in Houston that are adamant that the lack of appraisal volume is waiver related, and this is just an extension of these things going away. And I think your point is that this is all interest rate related stuff right now, and that we should see 400. Well, you probably won't say what we should see, but something higher than where we are when refi starts happening again, et cetera.
I would say this: even if we were doing no waivers at all, no waivers, no hybrids, no desktops, we would still be at 25% less volume than what was normal pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
so I wouldn't say that the waivers don't have any effect. Clearly they do. If we're granting waivers on 10 or 15% of loans, that's going to affect appraiser volume. I understand that.
Mm-hmm. You know, listening to you talk about kind of the edge cases, you know, somebody was telling me this, and I think they were pretty serious. I laughed because I think they were serious, but like, look, you know, our residential appraisals generally going away, sure, but there are still people that make buggy whips, you know, and so I'll just keep being that person and kind of the craftsman at the end of the day. You know, as I hear you talking about the edge cases, sure, there are few and far between, but there are properties that don't have good data or just really complicated. You know, that's not where my company thrives right now. I mean, we certainly thrive in not the 10% easiest where you've got a lot of data or a whole bunch of model matches, but in the more common properties that are out there. And so to those, you know, if waivers are being used 10 or 15% of the time, should I think about waivers being used 25% of the time in 5 years and more than, like, is it a steadily increasing amount of waivers that we should see?
I think that's really up to the appraisers, right? As I said, we make these decisions by comparing the algorithm results to the appraisal results. And if the algorithm can't equal the appraiser performance, then no, you won't see expansion.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right? The best thing you can do as an appraiser to make sure you're fighting I'm the appraiser and I want to fight the waivers. Okay, good. Do solid appraisals with good market analysis and supported adjustments, and report the condition honestly and correctly. And then the algorithm can't compete.
That is such an interesting, like, is a member of the appraisal profession. I think that is such an interesting challenge to try and tackle. And it's one Jeff and I have been thinking about for a long time, because if the average residential appraiser is working out of their home and not interacting with folks very often, which I think is the average, where is the education coming from, and where are we all getting on the same page to collectively lift our services, or even collectively listen to the users of our services? Because I'm not sure, I think appraisers are really good at telling their clients how they should use their product and what they should think about it. But I don't think we do a good enough job of listening to what our clients need and what sort of service we're providing them.
I would say I agree. It's very difficult for us to get messages out to the appraisers en masse, right? Most of them don't belong to an organization. It's not like we can send a message over to one group and say, here, get this to all the appraisers, right? So the solitary nature of the typical appraiser, right? I remember years ago, the Appraisal Institute told us the average appraisal company size was 1.2.
Yeah.
Right? So it is difficult to reach those folks. Yep. I don't have the answer to that. If I did, I'd have Scott already working on that.
Jeff, I'll turn it over to you after this comment. I mean, we had a podcast episode, at least in part, dealt with like the rise and maybe the fall of the appraisal firm over the last 3 or 4 years. But I do think, that was a part of Jeff and I's mission here, is how do we get a consistent product and lift up? And we didn't see this, but early on, we were hearing problems of this time adjustment issue when we launched. And we were able to, I was sort of in the camp of, hey, I kind of feel like I'm going to get punished or just punished making time adjustments. They were upward, generally speaking, at the time, 2020. But just kind of hearing from you guys and saying, well, look, I mean, we're actually putting a risk flag or a cautionary flag on your report if we see a time adjustment is warranted and you didn't make one. And so we were able to get that out to our group of appraisers. I mean, it's such a small set. I mean, it's sort of meaningless in the broader scope, but I think we as appraisers have to figure out how to crack that nut.
Yeah, I will say this. I think there's the appraisers in general do a really good job of selecting the comps, and because of that, it can cover up some things maybe they should do better in the analysis, right? Because if you have really good comps, think about if you have a really good set of comparable properties, and maybe the GLA adjustment should be $125 a foot, but you're adjusting at 35. Well, if you start with really good comps, sometimes the effect of that mistake is not going to manifest itself as well, right?
Yeah,
and I will share too. I think, yeah. Okay. And with time adjustments, there's an old trick that we see in a lot of appraisal reports, which is I'm not going to make a time adjustment, but I will get a comp that's about 500 or 1,000 square feet bigger and only adjusted at $30 or $35 a foot.
So you get the same number, just a different way.
In fact, I will share, we've shared this publicly in several settings. During COVID, when prices were going up nationally at 10, 15, 20% everywhere, in most places, the average GLA adjustment rate went down. And when we looked into it, that was the main reason why. We had prices going up, but our adjustment rate was going down. Well, that's how appraisers were essentially making the time adjustment without making the time adjustment. So
creative and
not effective, but well, that's so interesting, Danny. I'm just finishing my second term on our state appraiser board, and so we'll look at appraisals when complaints are filed, and that sort of a thing. And at the end of the day, what we always look for is what did you do and why, and is there market support for what you did? And I think I recounted this story, but I had an appraiser call me as the market had turned after the last crash, and the values were increasing. I made a positive time adjustment, and he was just so scared to make a time adjustment. He said, yep. I promised myself I'd call and congratulate the first appraiser I ever saw make one again. And it's like, I think we get these things where we're comfortable doing what we've always done as appraisers, or we're afraid that I'm going to get in trouble if I do something a different way. And it's more of an emotional response than a data-driven response. And what I hear you guys say, what I say from the state's perspective is, it's got to be data analysis. There's got to be support in the market for what you're doing. And so long as we're doing that and honing that skill, I think we should be able to outpace what the algorithms are doing. I think it's an encouraging message, that I'm hearing from you, that the appraisers at least hold our fate in our hands, or we control our fate. But that's contingent on continuing to evolve and be better data analysts than maybe we've had to be in the past.
Well, Jeff, I'm sure you've seen too. We have another classic example. We cite this one often. We had an appraisal report with really good market analysis, like 2 or 3 pages of really relevant, detailed stuff. Prices going up 10, 12%. And the appraiser comes in and does all this and then concludes and says, but I'm going to be conservative and do my time adjustments at 5%. I'm like, well, it's just, there is this feeling of, I don't want to inflate the values, right?
And there were people that went to jail, I mean, that were lost their licenses in the last cycle. I mean, that I know of, at least here and I'm sure around the country, for value inflation. But that was a very overt and intentional thing. It wasn't making a market condition adjustment on the margins, of a few percent or something. It was somebody ignoring that a home had been listed for $500,000, appraising it for $1 million a month later, not disclosing the listing history. I mean, it was overt stuff, but there's this this carry through. I hear it even today still, Danny, that if I'm conservative, I'm safe. I'm not going to get in trouble if I'm like erring on one side. And it's like the goal
Yeah.
should be not to err in the first place, and people just don't connect that dot.
I guess it's a good time to point out that our system also has an undervaluation flag.
Okay.
I've heard this, and yeah, Jeff, I think the system, unintended, it's just the system over the last 2 decades and coming out of the great financial crisis, there was a feedback loop to appraisers, overt or subliminal, and I think that ultimately got misinterpreted by appraisers that in time adjustments, they did to me. They just felt inflationary to a home's value, even when the data suggests, like, man, I got no other reason to do this except this aggressive time adjustment. It just didn't feel right, and I felt like I was going to get in trouble doing it, and so I think most appraisers felt that way.
Well, so we just released an announcement. We're going to require the appraisers to show the work.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to include your market analysis in the report, and you have to include that whether you make a time adjustment or not, right? Because either way, you actually made an adjustment. You may have made a market condition adjustment of 0, but that doesn't require any less support than a market adjustment of 5%. But in response to that, we've been on the circuit, and Scott Reuter and I just did a recent webinar with a large group of lenders, hundreds of lenders and loan officers on the call. And one of the things we emphasize is you should not be pushing back on market condition or time adjustments when there's adequate support for those in the appraisal report, right? You should be expecting. And we see the adjustments on 7% of reports over the past year, and actually that number's been very consistent for a number of years. I don't know what the actual number should be, but 7% does seem unreasonably low, right?
I think that's exactly right. And obviously, you drill down. I mean, what things look like in an MSA level may be different than a specific zip code or county or even a submarket within a neighborhood. And I think I'm seeing in, what's coming out with the new reporting formats and stuff, a little bit of focus on addressing, a market area specifically as opposed to, broader data sets. But it's not uncommon, I think, to have differing trends within a geographic area, but I think what you're saying is, the appraisers need to address that and then support, what your sub-market is doing if it's not, just matching a broader data set of a larger geographic area.
Well, I go back, Jeff. The good news is there's such great tools out there. I went to AMC land for 8 years, 5 years, so it's been 13, 14 years ago. I had software back then where we could import a large number of transactions. We could sift through them. We could look at the market conditions for 1-story homes versus 2-story homes, or we could do them by GLA segments, or we could look for that kind of market segmentation that you're talking about. And I feel very confident based on my review of the tools out there that what's available today is better than what I had 18 years ago.
You bet.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I think, a takeaway when I listen to you, Danny, when I listen to Scott, when I listen to Lyle, you guys are, and you've done it on this podcast, highlighting the principal role of the GSE, and it is risk management and mitigation. And, I think the appraisers are often, and there's been joint letters from organizations sent over kind of critical of all of these things, and they are assessing your risk analysis. And all that I can do as an appraiser, my advice to appraisers is listen to your clients and your ultimate users of your services and what they value in what you're doing. And if they are most interested in risk mitigation, then you need to be a risk mitigation tool. And so not trying to convince Freddie what they should want out of your appraisal report, but listen to what they are valuing in property condition, proper and supported time adjustment, proper and supported GLA adjustments, and of course, supported values. These are the things that are most important, and all the other stuff is either good enough or not as important.
Well, you were talking before about our AVM, and I think that's one key difference in our AVM versus most commercially available AVMs. Our whole goal with our AVM is to help in our risk management process. So we have different aims and goals than most AVM providers are trying to sell hits on their AVM.
Yeah.
We're not trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get results that are reliable for us to make our risk decisions on, and that affects everything we do about how we set our AVM up. Right? So I think that's I don't think our AVM is intentionally lower, as you suggested earlier. But at a certain point, we say we don't have enough confidence to even produce a number on this property, so we're not going to do it. Right? Whereas a commercially available AVM, I'm not going to mention any of them, but you can go in there and type in pretty much any address and it'll give you a result. It may not be a very reliable result, right? Yeah. So
interesting. Well, really fascinating. So I've seen some numbers that there are 70,000 appraisers around in the country, maybe 40 or 45,000 that are doing residential. You guys have posted how many appraisers are submitting to UCDP, I think. And is that 17, 20,000, something like that?
I think it was more in the 30 to 35,000. It was up to 40,000. I look at that chart, but I'm more focused on the number of appraisals, but it's right on our website. You can go look at it. It's updated monthly. I mean, there's no doubt the business is down, and it's down a significant number from what was normal for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So there will be that's going to have an effect. There's no doubt about it.
Danny, then my last question, which you may or may not want to answer, is do you think, let's say that the number is 30,000 appraisers that are doing work that ultimately get to your system? Are we going to need, so appraisers aren't going away, but are we going to need materially less appraisers over the next decade too?
I don't know. My gut would say that we'll probably need slightly fewer.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I do think we'll continue to see some improvement in the algorithms and whatnot. I know a lot of people point to the hybrids and they think that'll take away a lot of work as well. But I remind you, a hybrid is an appraisal. So there has to be an appraiser behind that, right? So that will have some effect, but I don't know for sure. I haven't studied it. Having said that, I have a group that I've asked to study it. I don't have those results yet.
Okay.
But we're going to look at some numbers like that, and we're going to look at projections and really crunch the numbers and see what we think.
My sense is that we will need less appraisers because in competent appraisers will be able to conduct more analyses on loans more often and more frequent with the tools that are available, and you guys are helping with the efficiencies on those levels with things like hybrids. That's where I think we're going to go. So we're still need a lot of appraisers. They're going to be doing more of the loans that are out there.
I think there is going to be more emphasis too on the show your work concept, like we just had with market conditions, right? And honestly, that shouldn't put an extreme burden on the appraisers with the tools that are out there now, right? Shortly after we put out the market conditions announcement, I had an appraiser email me and say, well, how much more fee should I charge and how much should my turnaround time increase? I'm like, this is analysis that appraisers always are supposed to have done. Standard Rule 1-3 in USPAP, got to analyze the market. But I do think we'll start to see more requirement, again, show the work, show the analysis, market conditions, maybe GLA adjustments. I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on supporting those. We already have a policy that says you have to use supported adjustments. I do think there's a great possibility the policy changes to show us your support for at least some of the adjustments.
And I think we're ready for that, expecting it at least. I think you guys have messaged well and sort of preparing appraisers that's coming at some point, and already something we should be doing. We're pulling up on an hour. One more question. I know. Time flies when you're having fun talking delinquency rates and all sorts of things here. But you glossed over, but just in passing on another point, FHFA mentioned this in their announcement of waivers. In this notion of speed, in speeding up the closing process, a number of the clients I work with are about speed. They're trying to differentiate themselves in doing that. It's a central tenet in what we're trying to do. And I think, you've sort of indirectly brought this up with the appraiser that's saying, well, man, my turn times are going to increase when I start doing this. And I think the real challenge here, in my own mind, and I kind of like you to speak to the use of speed, is like, we need to get better quality work done way faster. And if our quality valuations were delivered faster, we're at least taking one benefit away from not using the appraisal, it seems to me. At least that's where I effort. So I wondered if you could speak a bit to speed and the importance in you guys' process for that.
Oh, I think this has just been a societal shift, right? People expect fast service. I can't tell you how many things I've ordered on Amazon and received the same day, right? It's actually sometimes faster for me to order it on Amazon than go to the store. I'm not trying to compare Appraisal to Amazon. I don't want anybody. I know somebody will say, Danny said that. Look, at the end of the day, it's risk management. So first and foremost, we have to have confidence in the process, and we have to manage the risk. But if we can do that and increase the efficiency of the loan production process, that's a win-win. It bothers me as an appraiser. I worked in the field for 29 years. I can count on one hand the number of reports we delivered late. I was just raised by that dad that said, we'll get somewhere 45 minutes early rather than be 2 minutes late. Mm-hmm. And so I always had that built into me. And the thing and yet there seems to be, I learned this from, again, being on the user side for a long time now. There's certain appraisers that don't seem to understand this is it's a service business, right? And I get it. You have to do the work, and you have to do the right verification and the right support, but it has to be coupled with a sense of service as well.
I think it's a very valuable point, Danny. I mean, it's one thing as an appraiser to opine on a market, what's this property worth and what's its marketing time. It's a different experience to compete in a market for your valuation services. And it's easy to just do what we've always done and known to do. But I think you make a good point that technology, one of its side effects is a demand for increased efficiency, which to me would be defined as faster speed and better quality. And that, without effort and intention, isn't naturally going to happen. It's not easy for an appraiser. And as an appraiser, I'd rather do what I know how to do than learn how to do new things better and faster. But it's certainly available. And when we know what we're competing against, which are automated systems, we have to be at the top of our game. And my takeaway is that we at least can control to some extent, how valuable our services are, depending on how efficiently we're able to provide them to the market.
Yep. I do think that some of this will be driven by how efficient other parts of the mortgage production process get. Mm-hmm. It's still going to take X days to probably originate and close a loan, although the times for that it's pretty amazing what's happening with certain technology, right? Yeah. Again, I just got to emphasize, the first thing is, though, we've got to have enough quality in there that we can do good risk management from it. So don't be in a rush to give me a bad appraisal.
Well said.
A bad one faster doesn't do you much good, I'm sure.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
No, that makes sense. Well, Danny, we've really enjoyed the conversation, and we really are grateful for you coming on and sharing perspectives. Mark and I, efforts to just satisfy curiosities. We want to understand the ground source truth and understand what's happening out there, and what is the market and how do we compete effectively in it. And we really appreciate your coming on and being so generous with your time and perspective with us.
Happy to be here. Appreciate the invitation. Congratulations on getting to show 21.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll go ahead and close it out. But again, a big thank you, and we'll look forward to a future episode with you, Danny.
Thanks.
Thank you, Danny.